At the halfway point, we come to Death of a Party. What a grim title. For a fittingly and equally grim song, with its grungy, rhythmic guitar, some psychedelic synths, and muffled percussions, this also feels like proto-Gorillaz like with On Your Own. And right off the bat, Damon's lyrics speak of the death of the party. Is it a party or the party? Death of a party or death the party? I don't know. Anyways, he sings from the perspective of a wallflower, a shy introvert who's looking about in a party while distancing and keeping to himself. So this must be during the whole quarantine lockdown thing, considering what we're in right now, and deciding to go to another party and hang himself. The death of the teenager. Obviously and likely a suicide reference, but the following line, gently on the shelf, brings another possible meaning to it. Likely hiding ourselves in plain sight, even in a highly social occasion like a late party of sorts. How we often kind of just move on to the next scene and it's just the same as the last. The grass is just as green as it was on one side or the other. Many have interpreted this song as being an allegory for either the dying of the Britpop scene at the time, how destructive partying can end up being if not handled or controlled properly, or even the symptoms of AIDS. And as Captain Planet would probably say, AIDS stink. After that is Chinese Bombs, and boy is this a different one. The shortest track of the other Blur album at 1 minute and 24 seconds. Similar to Song 2, this is likely a mick take on the grunge music, with a similar scroungy guitar, even squeaking a bit at times, as well as the raw drums and the muffled, distorted vocals. It also reminds me a bit of Motorhead, with its very fast and speedy pace and beat. The somewhat audible lyrics in question seem to comment on the supernations, particularly China and USA, name-dropping them essentially, and their access to weaponry and military, and how paranoid they could easily be, and how they could easily just drop bombs on one another, and millions would just jump on it. Even back then, Damon was very much an opponent to any big wars. He was an anti-war activist and still is, which I can definitely side with him on, frankly. No one wants a war, no one wants to die in one. And he goes on to sing about a person getting a cab to Soho to let everybody know that he's got the touch. He's got the power. And if all hell breaks loose, he'd be riding the eye of the storm. Oh, wrong song. And by the end, he mentions Bruce Lee, a well-known actor who mostly featured in martial art movies, saving the day and the Chinese way. Which I think is meant to be tongue-in-cheek, poking a bit at the shallow archetypes or stereotypes that people would think of if thinking about China. This is a song I don't think anyone, even Damon himself, would write today. Although he and the rest of the Blur band would go on to expand a bit on the whole Chinese theme and motif with their most recent album to date in 2015, The Magic Whip. Next is I'm Just a Killer for Your Love, or as I might like to call it, the Yandere song. The best and simple way I could say to describe the song is one of Blur's sexiest tracks. This is a very steamy and seductive tune, like something you hear in a raunchy and sleazy nightclub or strip club. Again, there's a bit of a foreshadowing vibe to Gorillaz, with the very tinny cymbals and what sounded like record scratching at a few points. A lot of layers of sound within this track, which add like 50 flavors of sour and sweetness. The way Damon sings here, and how it's filtered, sounds so unrecognizable. Like if you were to listen to this song without any context, or even knowing that this is a Blur song, you probably wouldn't even guess it's Damon singing. Or 2D for that matter. The lyrics here are pretty simple and straightforward, about Damon's meeting a man without lungs, so a CPR doll, who goes and makes him some lunch, and they talk a bit about how they each lost friends. Then Damon goes on to cut off his hair in the road, drop off his load, take off his coat, and wipes his hand clean on the grass. Not very clean, but okay. And in the end, nothing ever really lasts, and he's just a killer for love. Likely meaning how life is short, so he might as well live the best of it he possibly could, even if he has to murder for some kind of companionship. I told you I call this the Undead song. We then calm down things a bit with Look Inside America. This is one of the few songs to actually sound generally like what they'd make back in the Britpop heydays, emphasizing a bit of Beatles influence just as much as, if not more so, than Beatlebum. And, ironically, in spite of its rather British English sound, this ballad comments on life in America, like with Chinese bombs, acknowledging the rather excessive consumerism and producerism at the risk of dumbing down and saturation, and at the cost of individual lifestyles and identities, with lines such as "Got an ad on K-Rock" and "Drink Pepsi is good for energy." While I do prefer Pepsi over Coca-Cola, I'm personally more of a Dr. Pepper person myself. There's also a bit of hint of sarcasm, probably, when Damon sings the line of "Look inside America, she's alright, she's alright." Kind of playing into the common fears of news and posters and all that, tell us all to calm down and not worry about the fears of life and all that. And a good chunk of these kind of themes were apparently inspired by the times Blur spent in the US across their tours. And such similar themes of traveling across the states and feeling out of place from all of it would further be explored in the Gorillaz album The Fall. The music itself also starts to utilize some strings partway through, such as the harping of strings, which really adds this grandiose orchestral feel to it, continuing to prove how the band, no matter how much they may change or adapt, they'll never forget their Brit roots, and I love them for that. Then we get some strange news from another star. Named after a short story by German-Swiss poet Hermann Hesse. I'm probably butchering that name wrong because I don't speak much Swiss or German. This melancholy acoustic space ballad is also very much influenced by David Bowie, not unlike MOR. This time by Bowie's more sci-fi oriented music like Space Oddity and Ziggy Stardust. It's here in this song, this point in the album, where we reach what seems to be the lowest and darkest point. Through the acoustic guitars and the slow and dour keyboard chords, Damon sings in a low and rather depressed manner about he seemingly wants to be free and released from the restrictions of life, how all his dreams are being washed away by the sea, wishing for a Death Star to come over and shoot him in order to give him any hint of peace. However, those Death Stars were blown away by the rebels, so Damon will have to settle for the Star Killer then. He then goes on to sing about how he doesn't believe in himself, and all he's ever done or tame, and he asks, will we still love him all the same though? To which I say, sure, we always love a fantastic musical genius like him. I mean, without Damon, we wouldn't have one of my favourite bands. And Blur. Similar to Beatlebum, this is likely about the effects and consequences of dosing on heroin, how it only prolongs his internal suffering, and yet he just can't seem to quit the stuff. He probably not intended it to be that kind of way, but it's still something worth of note. If Song 2 is Blur's take on Nirvana, then this is Blur's take on Radiohead, if anything else really. After that is the penultimate song, Moving On, with an apostrophe instead of a G. Things start to pick up yet once again with this easy rocking track. Graham's electric guitar and Alex's bass take dominance again, and Damon seems to brighten up a bit as well here. There's a little callback to I'm Just a Killer for Your Love, at the beginning when Damon mentions meeting a gourmet man with aluminium lungs. So I guess that CPR doll man without lungs in that one, whom I've joked about, eventually got a career in fine food service and earned enough to get actual lungs. Mind you, they're made out of post-transitional metal, but still lungs. Better than nothing, I suppose. Then the chorus kicks in, and he says, "This is the music, and we're moving on." Very likely a declaration of their new direction of music, and being quite unapologetic about it. However, the later verses kind of poke a bit of fun at the stereotypical rock star lifestyle, like dyeing your hair black, getting a Satan tattoo on your back, likely a reference to the phrase, "Get thee behind me, Satan," and piercings with a can of cola, putting on a fake tan, and now you're in a band. Then during the middle 8 section, Damon makes some weird yet very quirky noises with his filtered vocals and the keyboards, even doing a little brief screeching solo before the song gradually fades out after a bit of another one last chorus, which is just sweet-tastic. I love it. This is another one of the more underrated songs in my opinion. And so our album finally concludes with Essex Dogs, beginning with what sounds like a guitar or bass ascending and descending like a generator trying to charge up but then easing down rhythmically again. Then Dave's drums come into play, and so does Damon's voice. This time he doesn't sing but speaks in his usual low and dry tone, in a soliloquy about remembering what life must have been like, presumably back in Essex, which was where Dave Rowntree was born, as well as where Damon and Graham first met, and would eventually form Blur. In this stream of rock and roll consciousness, Damon mentions things like graffiti and spray cans of paint, sunsets and plains of cement, terminal pubs, and the smell of puke and wee. Lovely. Then he mentions having a panic attack coming on, resulting in his heart stopping and starting over again. The deadpan tone seems to indicate this must have happened to him more than once before, and it has just become a normal and expected occurrence for him. This, along with what seems to be a drilling sound effect behind it, are quite the unsettling implication there, I must admit. He then asks for a drink and warns you'll either catch the cold or the flu, or you'll catch the city. Nowadays though, even if you do catch the city, you'll still inevitably catch the COVID. And that's just the first half of the song. The other half carries on with the drowsy guitars and jazzy drums and other surreal sounds before we soon eventually grind to a sudden halt, leaving us a little bit uncertain and intentionally lost. However, it doesn't exactly end there either. For you see, this album has a hidden track. After Essex Dogs ends at about 6 minutes and 14 seconds, making it the longest track of the album, even more so than Beetlebum, we have about 10 seconds of uneasy silence before we get the true final song, Interlude, a short instrumental piece that continues to be just as uneasy. Fading in at first, with some various bits of different guitar sounds playing on top of each other, and before eventually fading back into silence. It comes out of nowhere, and it goes back right into nowhere just as soon, bringing an actual, almost proper end to the album, and I say proper quite loosely. Although considering the word interlude often refers to an interluding period of time, or intervening period of time, or a pause between two things, wouldn't it make sense for this to be put somewhere in between two of the previous songs in this album here? I guess it's just mostly out of irony and tongue-in-cheek, I suppose. And with all that said and done, this album is still really, really good. even after 25 years. It may not be as light or may not be as humorous as, say, Park Life or The Great Escape, but it does show Blur that they can be more mature. They can tackle more darker themes and more darker music. Now, it's not all grim, bleak, and gritty, for the most part anyways, but it's just enough that it can engage you and show you that, hey, people can grow up, we're growing up, and so should our music. A lot of the songs here are very diverse in their styles and sounds as well. Some ranging from being strange and surreal to hard and rocking to somewhere in between with a bit of Bowie and Beatles influence. If you're a fan of old 90s British rock bands, I say give this album alone a try. Sure, it may not be as well known as, say, the Gorillaz would eventually be, but it's definitely this album is definitely part of the owing that we should respect it for eventually leading us to the new era. And it's probably one of the last Blur albums to actually gain some form of recognition, mostly out of Song 2. But even with that, a lot of the songs here are still pretty good and still very underrated. I say give this one a try in case you already haven't. Next, let's just see how Damon and crew just set out to do things in the near future. Next time though, we go into the woods for some songs from the woods with a bit of Jethro Tull.